Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a lecture on the Apocalypse of John, more commonly known in some English-speaking countries as the Revelation of John. Apocalypse is just the Greek word for an unveiling or a revealing. We want to think about primarily John's apocalypse, the vision he saw, the letter he wrote. We want to recognize that bound up in the popular imagination with the book of Revelation are questions of the second coming and the so-called rapture and the millennium. I don't know how familiar these ideas are to many of you. I have to say I have made it a professional goal to avoid discussing some of these topics for the last few years because I regard them as kind of the seedier matters of early Christian thought, and in fact drastically blown out of proportion in the if you look at how little space is devoted to them in early Christian texts as compared with how much interest they get in modern speculation. And I put up here an image of Google searches. On the left, you get, these are American Google searches from some of the poorest and most down and out portions of the country. And you'll see that some of the most prominent searches were for Antichrist, rapture, hell, as well as some more disturbing questions like lupus symptoms and itching and how to kill a dog. But on the right, this is just an interesting sociological study. On the right were the most prominent Google searches in the wealthiest area codes in the country. And you'll notice iPad application and holiday greetings and how to get a jogger or a baby carrier or a good camera. It's interesting that there is a real sociological divide on who is most fascinated with questions of eschatological speculation. And at the very least, some of these issues do deserve our attention. And I want to sort of preface the introduction to the book of Revelation by saying a few words about New Testament eschatology more broadly. In part because one thing I want to emphasize is that the book of Revelation, despite its reputation, is not really taken up with concerns with a lot of the things that people think it's concerned about. It's written more as a prophetic critique of what was happening in the author's day. I'll say more about that, but first, let's just say a few things about New Testament comments about eschatology, the end times stuff, that are relatively clear, because there's a lot that isn't clear. So a few points that are relatively clear, and I think are important. One is that the beginning and the end, what in scholarship is sometimes called Urtzeit, Endzeit, that is German for beginning and end. These are to be alike somehow. What that means is that some of the things God set out to do in creation, even if this is a sort of mythical conception or the biblical conception of creation, these things will be achieved in the end. There will be an alpha and an omega, and they will look alike. So in various ways this can be seen, but to take an example from the book of Revelation, when John sees this final consummation, the new heavens and the new earth, he says, in the new heavens and the new earth, there was no sea, no ocean. To some of us who love the beach, this comes as a bit of a disappointment. But obviously, if you know your biblical story, you can see what he's driving at. In the book of Genesis, in the creation account, how does God create the stable and life-giving earth? By separating waters above it and below it. And this is the biblical author combating the popular Babylonian conceptions of his time, the ancient biblical author, saying the primordial sea god, Mot, this chaos god of disorder and madness, God has defeated that chaos monster by creating the earth, but that chaos lurks just above and below the earth. And in the flood, we see it break back through. Well, the message of Revelation's final vision is simply to say, in the end, chaos is ultimately banished, and what God was setting out to do by creating is brought to fruition. A relatively straightforward point about eschatology that I think we need to keep distinct from a related point is that personal eschatology can happen anytime. A given person's death. So Jesus tells the story of a guy who stores up lots of stuff in his barn, and he says, man, it's great to have lots of stuff in my barn, but then his life is demanded of him. And the angels say, you fool, what good will it do you? It is a timeless truth that one's end can come at any moment. That needs to be kept slightly distinct from a more, frankly, problematic aspect of biblical eschatology, which is the insistence that Jesus could come back at any moment. We tend to relate these in our minds. The one's easy to understand and is obviously true. The other is not that easy to understand and is kind of a problem. Second, lots of different books agree there's going to be a post-mortem judgment where God rights the wrongs, and it's not entirely clear how Paul's message that God justifies people by faith fits with Paul's message, and this is Paul's message, that God will pay everyone back for what they did in the body, whether good or bad. Theologians have tied themselves in knots for centuries trying to show how those two things fit together, but every biblical author in the New Testament holds both of those points. God graciously saves, people don't deserve it. God also will fully satisfy justice, not only in the sense that there was an atoning sacrifice. Jesus, from beginning to end, Paul, all the authors agree, God will pay people back. In a sense, I would say one of the more kind of important broad points about eschatology is that there's a sense in which there will be a final chapter to the experiment of human history, to this grand story, a final chapter that makes the other chapters finally make sense. This is gestured at with the expression from the book of Revelation, God will wipe away every tear. It's as if in the same way you might read a book and a final chapter can shed new light on what went before it. You realize, oh, that was this character's motivation, or that was why this happened. The book of Revelation and some of the other material about what will happen when it's all said and done essentially says, we don't have the final chapter yet, we don't know why it will make sense, but we have been promised by the author a chapter is coming such that what currently looks drastically unjust and broken, it will make sense. We have confidence in that. We don't have the chapter, we're promised it's coming. I mention these things because I think they're kind of useful things to think with, and we want to keep them distinct from the fact there is a lot of biblical eschatology that's not so easy, that's either just difficult because it seems like a false expectation, or difficult because it seems morally problematic, or whatever else. So we have everything from the fact that Jesus says multiple times and in different ways all these things, and he talks about signs in heavens and on earth. All these things will happen in this generation, Jesus says. That is Mark 13, Matthew 24, Luke 21. Jesus says in different ways, I am coming quickly. That was a problem for early Christians, and they dealt with it in a couple different ways. They actually seem to have been surprisingly less troubled by the so-called delayed parousia than later Christians think they should have been. But it's still an issue, it's a problem, it's a challenge. I think difficult in a different way is talk about an antichrist figure or a beast. The book of Revelation actually never mentions an antichrist, but it has this figure called the beast. Predictions of series of woes and so on. This is difficult for a lot of reasons. One, because the language is cryptic and veiled, and It's not entirely possible to parse it out. Two, it's difficult because on the one hand, if you look at what Jesus says about end times type stuff, he insists again and again, you do not know the day nor the hour. In fact, not even the Son knows. The angels don't know, only God knows. Therefore, be ready. It will come when you don't expect it, like a thief in the night. Although Jesus says that, you don't know, be ready, he also says, but by the way, there will be the following series of events. Look for them. Recognize the signs. It's a little hard to see how those two messages relate to each other because you can see the problem. We get talk of a millennium, which confused people from the start. And this is a concept found only in the book of Revelation. Only the book of Revelation, chapter 20, mentions a millennium. Is it possible to relate that to Paul's end time scenario or to Jesus' end time scenario? Part of the problem comes because Paul describes a rapture, which no one else describes. Revelation describes a millennium, which no one else describes. How are those things to be related? Can they be put on the same timeline, as it were? People have tried. There are a lot of different scenarios. We are not going to get bogged down in the nitty-gritty of that. But already in the 2nd and 3rd century, Christians were at each other's throat about whether, let's say, this millennium, they actually weren't that interested in the rapture business, but they debated greatly. When Revelation says there will be a 1,000-year reign, is that going to be a literal earthly reign? And if so, think of all the problems that raises. If we have pre-resurrection bodies, how will there be 1,000 years? Like, will bodies just get 1,000 years old? And the saints are supposed to be ruling with Christ for 1,000 years, but whom are they ruling? If all evil has been banished, is there anyone bad to rule? And what kind of rules do they need? And as we'll see, there are a lot of imponderables, and early Christians fought with each other because some said this is entirely symbolic, some said it's entirely literal, and some said some sort of third option. We want to just sort of acknowledge these are hard issues. We're not going to unpack all of them. What we are going to do is come to kind of the fountainhead of a lot of this speculation and a lot of this confusion, and that's the book of Revelation. And we will not have an opportunity to demystify its every vision, its every trumpet, its every peal of thunder. But we can make the book a little less cryptic by saying a few words about how its imagery works and showing, for at least some of its imagery, it's pretty clear what Revelation was talking about. It's useful to make a distinction between an apocalyptic format or genre and apocalyptic eschatology. In short, there are lots of apocalypses, that is, revelations given to seers, and these usually entail a trip to heaven, learning some sort of mysteries. It can be mysteries about the end of time, but it can also just be learning about meteorological mysteries, sort of the questions you get in the book of Job. Where is the wind stored? Where does the morning star sleep? Well, the seers who get taken up to heaven get to learn those things. And they often have these discussions with angelic interlocutors. So 4th Ezra, which we read earlier in the semester, is an example of an apocalyptic format. Apocalyptic formats don't have to have apocalyptic eschatology, although they can. In apocalyptic eschatology, you get a predetermined sequence of events, often sort of cataclysmic and otherworldly. So first, the man of lawlessness will do X, Y, and Z. Then so-and-so will appear. Then the sky will turn to blood. The sky will turn black. The moon will turn to blood, blah, blah, blah. There are lots of apocalypses that have apocalyptic eschatology as part of their program. That's what the seer learns is, here's what's going to happen. But you can have apocalyptic eschatology without having a formal or the genre of apocalypse. So for instance, in 2 Thessalonians, Paul says, hey guys, don't worry, the parousia didn't happen already. Why? Well, because first the man of lawlessness has to go into the Holy of Holies and declare himself, say obnoxious things. And here, until those things happen, the end can't come. There's a sequence of events that are otherworldly, that are predetermined, and So again, you have apocalyptic eschatology, you have apocalyptic format. One important thing to say about apocalyptic format is that it doesn't always have to be crisis literature. So some apocalypses, and a popular way of thinking about them, is that this is the sort of literature produced by people with their backs against the wall. When the world has so thoroughly ground you down, when the emperor is rounding up Christians and throwing them to the lions, you say, God, how long? And God says, for times and times and half a time. I'm quoting there from the book of Daniel, which is the Old Testament equivalent of an apocalypse, Daniel 7 through 12. And that is crisis literature. It's written under great duress to offer comfort to the faithful, to explain how long the present miseries will endure. But it's also possible to write in an apocalyptic format with the heavens unveiled to people who are perfectly comfortable. In fact, maybe all too comfortable. And I think this is important to keep in mind when we look at the book of Revelation, because it is addressed to specific churches, and one of the charges that Jesus makes through the seer to these churches is, hey, you guys aren't miserable at all. In fact, you're actually living high on the hog. You're a little bit too comfortable. And what I want to do is peel back the heavens and show a God's eye perspective on what it is that you're part of. You are enjoying the wealth and tranquility of the Roman Empire a little too much. And what you're not seeing is that that empire is built on shattered hopes and dreams of the people Rome conquers and abuses. That, in a nutshell, is the point Revelation wants to make. We'll tease that out a bit more. The other thing we need to say is that in the apocalyptic format, you get a lot of imagery, right? And some of it's biblical. So you get language from the prophets, language from the book of Genesis and the creation account, language from the Psalms about Leviathan and Behemoth and so on. You get also mythological language that isn't even just biblical. So you'll get stories of the ancient dragon and so on. We get that in Revelation. And you get contemporary political imagery. We want to make a certain distinction then, as these unveilings sort of unmask the truth about what's going on and what's going to happen. We want to make a distinction between what we might call timeless symbols and symbols with specific reference. Because when you read the book of Revelation, you're immediately struck by the extraordinary and frankly bizarre imagery, peals of thunder, bowls of wrath poured out one after the other, books to be opened, scrolls to be cracked open, some of which speak, multiple angels and so on, 7 eyes and 7 spirits, and the images are almost phantasmagoric. They don't parse out literally. A couple of ways people have reacted to this is to sort of say, well, these are timeless symbols, and there are timeless symbols, like the example of the sea. The sea represents chaos. That's true in the Bible, it's true in other religions. It would be absurd to say, which sea are you talking about? Is this a judgment on the Indian Ocean or perhaps on the Pacific? That's absurd. Clearly the sea, the ocean, represents just chaos. On the other hand, there's also a lot of imagery here that is specific. So I've put up here a political cartoon, and I've used one from an American context because I just feel on firmer ground that at least I know what the symbols are for. This is a 19th century political cartoon. Imagine someone reading this and not being familiar with the conventions of political cartoons and seeing it and thinking, wow, what strange people in 19th century America. They must have been religious fanatics, and perhaps they were delirious or on drugs or something, because they thought that donkeys and elephants could speak to each other. And there was a creepy old man with a weird hat who made comments about the donkeys and the elephants. All right, that's obviously absurd. But it would be equally absurd to interpret this as some sort of timeless set of symbols. So elephants, let's say, elephants stand for memory, right? But this little political cartoon is not an allegory about memory and the encounter of memory with what should donkeys represent? Let's say stubbornness. This is not an allegory about the encounter of memory and stubbornness and how they never come together, right? These images have specific reference in their time and place. An elephant stands for the Republican Party. A donkey stands for the Democratic Party. So although the imagery is fantastic, the point isn't animals are talking. The point is a comment on Democrats and Republicans at a particular point in time. And that is quite important because the book of Revelation has some imagery that's probably best understood as symbolic of timeless truths, but it also has quite a lot of imagery which is fairly transparent in its referent. So to take a couple of chapters that are really clear in this regard, it makes an extended critique of Roman military might and of Roman economic might. It speaks of a woman seated upon 7 hills. We don't need to ask about some sort of timeless myth about the feminine or what hills stand for. This is the standard image of Rome, seated on the 7 hills of the city of Rome. Here's a coin from the 1st century. When the book of Revelation has bad things to say about this whore of Babylon, it's as transparent in its time and place as it is to have a political cartoon with donkeys and elephants. And partly what we need to do then is familiarize ourselves with the symbols of the 1st century, as it were with the political cartoons. So we know, who's he critiquing? What's he unhappy about? What does he want Christians to wake up and change so that they can have an ethical encounter with this Roman power? Let's start by noting that the book of Revelation is presented as a letter, as a circular letter. Now, it is, of course, a revelation, a vision. John says, I was snatched up in the spirit. He sees this vision, but it's presented as a letter. And in fact, as a letter to 7 churches, which each of them is to read and to pass along. So whatever is written to your particular church will also be read to the other 6. Already in antiquity, it was believed that by addressing 7 churches, John showed that he was addressing all churches everywhere, that this was 7 as a sort of a universal number. John opens by saying, John, to the 7 churches, grace to you and peace. That sounds a lot like 1 Corinthians. Paul, to the church of God in Corinth, grace to you and peace. We know Paul's writing a letter, and the book of Revelation concludes, come Lord Jesus, the grace of the Lord Jesus be with all the saints. Paul concludes 1 Corinthians, the same letter, come Lord, the grace of the Lord Jesus be with you. You can see that John opens and closes this long and, confusing book as a letter. And within it, there are specific letters, 7, to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. And of course, we don't want to minimize the fact that there are some things that you don't usually find in letters, like chapters 4 through 21, where we get all of these visions. But I think it's useful for interpreting the book of Revelation to keep in mind it is presented as if it's a letter. Here's what I want you to know and to do. And we can take a quick glimpse at one of these letters, in fact, at the pattern of all of them, because it's important for interpreting the visions that John presents first these specific charges to the different churches. So he opens this by saying, John to the 7 churches, and then each church gets a letter. And each of these 7 letters has exactly the same format. To the angel of the church of Laodicea, or pick your place. First we get the destination, then a command to write. The words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the origin of God's creation. So some sort of titles of Christ, and most of the titles are taken from John's first vision. Then Jesus, speaking through John, says, I know, and you get some sort of content about the churches. So in the case of the Laodiceans, I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were cold or hot, but since you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. You say I'm rich and I've prospered. You don't realize you're wretched and pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. So we get some sort of admonition then. So here's what I know about you. You think you're doing fine. And then we get an admonition. I advise you, buy from me true gold refined by fire so that you may be rich indeed, and white robes to clothe yourselves and hide the shame of your nakedness, and salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. There are the admonitions in the case of this one letter. And then each letter concludes by saying some sort of call to hear. So in this case, listen, I'm standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open, I will come in and eat with you and you with me. And finally, a promise to the one who conquers. I will give a place with me on my throne, just as I myself have conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. Some of these letters are encouraging, and Jesus says through John to the church, I know you're having a hard time, hang in there. But what's important to observe is that it doesn't sound like crisis literature, because most of these letters are rather challenging, and they sound like wake-up calls to a church that's really pretty comfortable. In this case, a church that says, I am rich. And the message is, no, you're not really rich, not in things that count. Now, because each letter concludes with this message, to the one who conquers, I will give, and then different promises are given using images that appear later in the book, it's worth sort of saying, what is conquering? What does that consist of? And I think one way you could interpret the rest of the book of Revelation is spelling out how you conquer, what it takes to conquer in the terms Revelation has in mind. This language of conquering or overcoming is prominent throughout the book. So forces of evil conquer, the beast, who we'll say more about in a moment. The beast conquers, and he conquers with might, with the usual conventional forces. There are also people in the vision who conquer, and they usually conquer with their witness or their words. And that's really important, because I think Revelation pictures a battle of truth with falsehood. And finally, Jesus conquers. And so here we get a clue to how to imitate Jesus and how to conquer like he did. Well, chapter 5, John hears a word. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered. And here we see the technique of the book of Revelation. He loves to drop in paradoxes. You turn to see a lion who conquered, but what you see instead is a lamb that's been slain. And therein lies one of the central messages of the book of Revelation. The way this battle actually works, he says, is that those who are willing to be slaughtered will win. And the beast, which is currently having its day and is slaughtering the martyrs, it will be conquered by their witness, by their martyrdom, by their words of their truth. What torments the people of the earth in chapters 12 and 13, 11, 12, and 13, the words of these witnesses. It's what they say. It's their truth. When Jesus comes riding in chapter 19, what's the sword that comes out of his mouth? It's his words. And Revelation wants to say, I'm flipping the script. And this battle is going to be won by testimony and truth, by some sort of alternative vision, not by Rome's typical weapons of economic and military might. I've said that much of the book of Revelation's critique of Rome would have been fairly transparent, using images like a woman seated on 7 hills. What about the number of the beast? This famous and apparently cryptic image. Well, in this case, again, I think it would have been fairly clear that it was speaking of Nero Caesar. We want to unpack this. Revelation 13, verse 18. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. Bit of background here. This is pretty clearly employing the Jewish practice of gematria, where you have a numerical value for each letter, and therefore you can tally the numerical value of a series of letters and say what the numerical value of a name is. So for instance, in the Jewish and Christian texts called the Sibylline Oracles, we find this: the name of the Son of God will be reckoned 888. To any Greek-speaking Christian, that's pretty easy. The name Jesus in Greek. The Greek letter iota, the Greek letter eta, that is 10, that is so on and so forth, all the way through, tallies 888. A couple other examples of gematria, just so you see how prevalent it is. This isn't only a Jewish or Christian practice. There are actually graffiti on the walls, including one from the walls of Pompeii, which says, "I love the gal whose number is 545. What number does that work out to in Latin? Well, who knows, but some lucky girl whose name, I'm sure some lucky girl was looking at the wall and saying, oh my gosh, my name tallies up to 545. I guess whoever wrote that likes me. Just showing here the sort of popularity of this sort of practice, we're going to say more about how it was used. So, 666, we're looking for someone's name. In fact, the author of Revelation even tells us it is the number of a person. Whose name tallies 666? Well, happily, in this midst of this critique of a beast, of a power that sits on seven hills, that does the sorts of things we sure know that Rome does, whose name tallies 666? The name Nero Caesar. That tallies 666. And to almost confirm this hunch, there's actually a textual variant in the Greek manuscripts. Some Greek manuscripts of the book Revelation say the number of the beast is 616. Well, that's kind of funny. I mean, you need to get this number right. We're trying to figure out who the beast is. Well, there are two ways to spell Nero. One is the one we're more familiar with, Nero Caesar, without an extra N. And if you spell it Nero Kaiser in Hebrew, that tallies 616. In other words, the two variant numbers that we find correspond to the two ways to spell Nero Caesar in Hebrew letters. Now, this alone is interesting, and I don't know if it's persuasive to all of you, but it's persuasive to me, it's persuasive to a lot of people, that clearly the book of Revelation is naming Nero. His number is 666. There is in fact a lot of reason to think the book of Revelation is talking primarily about Nero, because even this talk of him being killed by a sword, talk of how he's riding in from the east, this all corresponds to a set of fears that people had that Nero was going to re-invade Rome from Parthia, that although he had been killed, it was a fake death or a half-death, and that Nero was alive again and gathering an army in the east in Rome's enemy Parthia, and he was going to invade Rome. There were all these kind of fantasies and deliriums about the power of Nero after his death. The book of Revelation is mocking Nero and employing this very sort of propaganda. But it's more than the fact that it just identifies Nero by his name. Gematria was supposed to often prove a point. And here again, I'll give a pagan example of the practice of gematria making a point. Nero, as you may know, was sort of notorious as a really rotten guy. And one of the supposedly nefarious things he did, one of the rumors about him during his life, was that he killed his own mother. This is, of course, debated. Some people say, no, that's just a slander. Other people say, no, he really did. Well, the Romans came up with a proof that he killed his own mother, and again, it's based on gematria. And this is important because it shows how gematria works. As for the question, did Nero kill his own mother? They note that Nero in Greek, not in Hebrew letters, in Greek letters, tallies to 1005. And the Greek phrase, killed his own mother, those letters, believe it or not, also tally to 1005. What that means is that saying Nero is 1005 is not simply a way to say, here's a code word for Nero, here's a secret way to write the name. It's a sort of name mysticism. It's a way of saying, oh, he did kill his own mother. The tally of his name is the same as that expression. Now, if this is the way gematria was put to use, what would we expect of the number 666? What we would expect is that if he's trying to prove that Nero is the beast, we would expect beast to tally 666, and thereby to prove that Nero is the beast. And lo and behold, beast in Greek tallies 666. Therefore, beast in Hebrew letters is 666, beast is 666, Nero in Hebrew letters is 666, ergo, Nero is the beast. I realize that may look like a lot of sort of bizarre numerology and calculation and speculation, but I hope I've illustrated here that this isn't just fantasy, this is typical of the practice of the day. The same sort of calculations that people were putting up in graffiti on the walls, the same sort of calculations that were used to settle a political rumor. This is what Revelation is using to say, aha, this nasty emperor, he really is the beast. His name equals beast. We've probably said more already than you maybe wanted to hear about the number of the beast, but I'll just note, and I'm following the very erudite scholar Richard Bauckham here, that there are other peculiarities of the number 666, and I'll just mention this briskly, and if you're curious, I can point you to his chapter. He devotes over 100 densely argued pages to this, but ancient folk really loved numbers, and they speculated about numbers' properties. If you've ever read Plato, it goes back to Plato and before. Pythagoras already had a sort of number mysticism. One thing people were interested in numbers is that they noticed some numbers are triangular. And triangular means a number where 1 plus 2 plus 3, that sequence, those are all triangular numbers. 1 plus 2 plus 3, you can see it makes the shape of a triangle. And as you go along, there's a set of tallies. So the number 3 is rectangular, the number 6 is rectangular, the number 10, the tally of each of those in the series. The upshot is that the number 666 is a rectangular number. What's more, and here my head explodes, but it's intriguing, so I pass it along. As Richard Bauckham observes, 666 is actually a doubly triangular number. It is the triangle of a triangle. And in fact, that's exceedingly rare. So I put at the bottom here the sequence of doubly triangular numbers, numbers that are a triangle of a triangle. 666 is the 8th of these. And Bauckham thinks this is of significance to the author, 666 being the 8th doubly triangular number. As for the beast, he is an 8th. Revelation 17, verse 11. Bauckham does more to tease this out and why this isn't just a bizarre coincidence, but why the number speculation would be meaningful to the author of Revelation, why number speculation was meaningful to the early Christians and ancient philosophers in general. I'm going to bring this to a close. When I read this sort of stuff, I find it intriguing, but also you think of the expression of the Roman governor to Paul, your great learning is driving you mad. I'll try to say a word briefly about the millennium, only because it has been a point of controversy, and this was already a point of controversy among the ancient Christians. The millennium is only described in one place in the New Testament. That's the book of Revelation, chapter 20. And it leaves a lot of questions unanswered, and we'll say more about that. I think it's really trying to say, to answer with a set of images, who truly rules, who truly has life. Here's what I'm driving at. In Revelation 19, the prior chapter, context is everything, it depicts the defeat of the beast who's terrorized the world and deceived the world for so long. The beast and his false prophet. And their false rule and their deception is transferred to the witnesses of truth in chapter 20. So although there are a lot of details, the most important elements are that the devil, the dragon, is bound for 1,000 years, which means he can no longer deceive. And relatedly, who is victorious? Who has true life? Who has true rule? The answer? Those who were the victims of the beast and his regime. So the seer here, John, says thrones were set up. Thrones, that is a notion of rule. And who sits upon them? The souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony, their witness, their martyria. They refused to worship the beast. And so although it looked like they had been beaten, they're the ones who come to life. They're the ones who actually rule. And they rule for a long period of time. No doubt a symbolic period of time, but a long period of time. This is to contrast everything about the beast. The beast rule was temporary and passing. He lost. But the dead in Christ win. We will note briefly here that we see some of the book of Revelation's technique in that it draws on images from the Old Testament. So the book of Revelation, quite amazingly, it never cites a passage from the Old Testament per se. It doesn't ever say, thus it was written in the book of Daniel. But it is saturated with the language and imagery of the Old Testament. And what it tends to do is take a passage and unpack it. The thrones Daniel spoke about, and the coming of the Ancient One, and the court and the books. It unpacks this and expands it and says, this is about the final judgment where God's people win. Strangely, the book of Revelation says, the beast will be bound 1,000 years. Well, why bind him 1,000 years and let him out? What's going to happen at the end? I think the main point is to say the devil's lost all of his power. So you see here, as the chapter 20 goes on, when 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison, and he'll come out to deceive the nations again. Gog and Magog, these are terms from Ezekiel, he'll draw them together in order to gather them for a great battle. They're as numerous as the sands of the sea. They march over the breadth of the earth. They surround the camp of the saints in the beloved city. You should picture here the dramatic battle scenes from the Lord of the Rings and dark armies gathering. But here's the point. And then fire came down and consumed them. The final battle is totally anticlimactic. All the real power has already been robbed. The Lamb that has triumphed by his blood has eviscerated the ability of Satan to continue to deceive. And so how to relate Revelation's vision here to the actual historical course of events really confused early Christians. Will the saints reign in heaven? Or is this after the first resurrection? How does this work? Is this allegorical? Is this going to be an historical 1,000-year reign? If so, whom are the saints ruling? How can there be 1,000 years of life with non-resurrection bodies? Because it's clear that this is not the actual resurrection. This is just a resurrection of souls. I think all those questions are probably not really the questions Revelation's trying to answer. It's trying to say God's team wins, and it wins by witness to the truth. Finally, Revelation ends where the book ought to end, and kind of nobly. The devil and his beast and his prophet, this wicked trinity are finally done away with. They're thrown into the lake of fire. And the dead, great and small, rise. The books are opened. The final judgment. The sea gives up its dead. And how does it end? Death and Hades give up the dead. And death and Hades are killed, which, to put it in a more simple Pauline vernacular, is to say the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Revelation concludes just as Paul concludes in 1 Corinthians 15. In the end, God triumphs. And because God created a world for life, in the end, if God is to be victorious, that doesn't simply mean sort of tearing down his enemies. It means undoing even death, wiping away every tear, and creating the new heavens and the new earth, bringing to fruition all of God's purposes in creation. I won't pretend that we have cleared up every obscurity about the book of Revelation. Not every obscurity can be cleared up, but it would be useful, I think, to take away from the book of Revelation that to a large degree, it's written to address first century concerns of the churches it is written to. Just as Paul writes to specific churches to address their questions, Revelation says, hey guys, you in Laodicea, you in Ephesus, here's what God thinks about what's going on for you. Here's what God wants. It then has a proliferation of images and language in order to peel back the heavens and say, here's how present reality looks from God's perspective. Here's what victory actually consists in. And here are the reasons victory, as unlikely as it seems, is ultimately guaranteed.